So let's look at a few other refinements we can make. For starters, I think it's pretty lame that we've gone through all this work to sign the user in, and all we say is, welcome, player. You know, we know our user signed in. We should talk to him or her by name. So let's do that. Now what I'm going to do here is go into my intro view controller, and where we say refresh interface based on sign in, instead of saying welcome player, we're going to get that information from the Google Play Game service. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say self.signinlabel.text equals, and a string with format, welcome, object to be named later. And if you've either started browsing through our reference documentation or just kind of fooling around with code hinting, maybe you've noticed that through the GPG Manager shared instance, we can get this thing called the application model. And this starts to contain some interesting information about the application. One thing it contains is this property called player, which has another property, I think the only thing associated with it right now, called local player, that has a name. So let's see what happens when we run this. Oh, we get welcome null. That's not right. So what's going on here? Well, what happens is when you sign into Google Play Games, the Google Play Game service will go out onto the network and start fetching information that it thinks you're going to need, like information about the player, definitions for all your achievements, the player's progress towards completing those achievements, and so on. However, since we're trying to say hello to the player immediately after sign-in is complete, the service hasn't had enough time yet to go out and get all that information, or at least confirm that the cached information it has is still up to date. So how do we fix this? Well, one way might be to add a timer so that 2 seconds later we say hello to the player, but there's a more elegant way of doing it that the service provides for us. So instead of setting the text right away, I'm going to do this. I'm going to call the GPG Manager shared instance, and I'm going to access the application model. And within the application model, I'm going to call this method loadDataForKey with a completion handler. Now the key here is, and this is just a constant that we define, GPG model, and you can see it down here, local player key. And for our completion handler, let's indent that a bit. Now we can look and say, well, if there was no error, set self.signinlabel.text equals, and a string with format, welcome, object, and then we can call GPG Manager shared instance application model .player .local player .name. Whew. Now this time when we run the application, we get back a personalized message that says welcome with my name. By the way, there's also another method called reloadDataForKey. Now this method works almost the same as loadDataForKey. I believe the difference is that reloadDataForKey tells the service, I want you to ignore any cached data you have, go out onto the net and actually grab any new information. Whereas loadDataForKey says, if you have cached information, it's okay to use it. So I think if we run this, you might see a slightly longer delay in between when you sign, the sign out button appears and the welcome Todd Kirkland message appears. And I believe that's because I'm making an extra or a forced network call that I didn't necessarily have to make. So we're going to switch this back to loadDataForKey. Finally, I'm going to show you one other problem that we might want to fix. Now, I've got a pretty good internet connection. As it turns out, Google's got internet. Go figure. But watch what happens when we run this. You're going to see for a brief moment that the G+ sign-in button is still there. It takes a moment for the service to sign me in and make the sign-in button go away. And certainly when I'm out in the real world on a 3G network or something, that delay could be much longer. And you don't want your user repeatedly clicking that sign-in button thinking that for some reason they're just not getting signed in. So what we want to do is when we get to that moment where we're trying silent authentication, we want to let the user know, hey, we're trying to sign you as in the background. Please be patient for a minute. And we can do that by looking at the value that gets returned by try silent authentication. Now this actually returns a Boolean. And this Boolean is yes if the system has determined that it is going to try and silently authenticate the user. It says, looks like there's an old OAuth token here. I'm going to try and sign the user in. So we can take advantage of that. The first thing we're going to do is create a little property here. Not atomic, bool, that is trying silent sign in. And then down here, I'm going to say self.tryingSilentSignin is equal to the value that gets returned. And remember, this gets returned immediately by the try silent authentication method. And then we can go back up to our refresh interface based on sign in method. And I'm going to go up here and say self.signInButton.enabled equals not self.tryingSilentSignin. So if we get to this point, the user is not signed in yet, but the system is attempting to sign them in, you will see the sign in button visible, but it will not be enabled. Similarly, if the user is not signed in yet and silent authentication has failed, or the system says, I don't think this person's logged in before, or just wasn't able to silently sign the user in, the sign in button will be visible and it will be enabled. There's one other thing I forgot to do, which is here under finish with auth. We get to this point once the attempt to silently sign the user in is finished. So we can say self.tryingSilentSignin is equal to no. All right. So now let's run this. And you should see that that sign in button was visible but disabled for that brief moment in between signing in and when the sign out button appeared. Now I'm going to sign out, and it looks like the sign in button is there and it is once again enabled. I'm going to click it. I'm going to say accept. Go back into the game. And there we go. We're signed in. We have a nice sign out button that, again, we could probably hide in a menu somewhere. And the game is addressing me by name. I feel like we're friends already. So at this point, we're pretty much done with the section on getting the user signed in. From here, it's the fun stuff. We get to now add achievements, we get to add leaderboards, we can share our gameplay with a friend, that kind of stuff. Now that we've gone through all the hard work of getting the user signed in, let's start having some fun. And we're going to do that in the next chapter. So I'll see you in a few days. Thanks.